So the next session is speaker is Professor Sombat Vipasatsuk, Specialty Medicine, Deputy Chair of the Department of Medicine. So he graduated in the Melbourne University, Faculty of Medicine Thailand, and Fellowship in Gastroenterology at Chulalongkorn University, and Research Fellow in the Mayo Clinic. So in 2012, he received a PhD at Chulalongkorn University. And he has many published research about the Nafld, such as the Nafld in the coronary artery disease and atherosclerosis, and the Framingham's risk score in the heart disease in Nafld. As we know that the clinical burden of the Nafld is not only confined to the liver-related mortality, but there is a growing evidence that Nafld is a multi-system disease. His topic today is Nafld, problem beyond the liver in Asian perspective. Please welcome Professor Sombat.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson, for your kind introduction. So my task today is to talk about the problem beyond the liver in Nafld. So as our Chairperson says, that fatty liver or Nafld disease is one of the complex interaction among multi-system. As you saw from the picture here, this is one of the complex picture. But I just want to emphasize that besides the liver, there are many systems that have effects on the pathology in liver and as well as other systems, including cardiovascular disease, obstructive sleep apnea, chronic adenoma, and other several systems. But because of limited times, I will emphasize only 3 systems that I just showed you the picture. Why I choose these 3 systems? As you see from the table, the first 3 systems have a strong association between these comorbidities and fatty livers with odds ratio or relative risk about 1.5 to 2. So this is why I need to emphasize them in detail. And another reason is that, as you all know, that mortality rates of fatty liver patients usually present about 13 to 45%, and the leading cause of death were coronary heart disease and malignancy that not including the liver cancer as a primary. Colon cancer is one of them. So I think this is very important for the clinicians. We have to look for other systems that link to the problem that bring patients to see you too. So I start with the cardiovascular disease and fatty liver. I think this information is all strong and confirm that patients with fatty liver or NASH are associated with increased endothelial dysfunction, intimal medial thickness, abnormality in cardiac structure, and cardiac vascular events post-transplantations. All of this information is independent of type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome or obesity that usually present in this patient group. And there is inconclusive data but show trend that all of this information, especially cardiovascular disease, usually present in those with NASH or fibrosis than Nafld who have no any information or mild information. But we need more information to conclude that. This slide, I want to show you the strong evidence or studies that support my talk. The first 2 studies, as you can see, is from the early phase, about 10 to 15 years ago, show no association for abnormality or high cardiovascular mortality between patients with Nafld and general population. But later on, as you can see, 4 studies. The first one from the chairperson, Professor Adams, and the subsequent study supporting that patients with Nafld have increased all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortalities especially in those with NASH, higher than Nafld and higher than those with, in general populations, about 2 times. And this is another study to confirm that cardiovascular event is more prevalent in patient post-transplantation when we compare between those from NASH and those from alcohol. So you can see that NASH patients have higher cardiovascular event than those from alcohol, clearly. So how to explain the mechanisms of higher cardiovascular event in NASH patients? This is a nice study, a nice review from New England Journal of Medicine. One of the key wording in this article is that liver is being both the target of the resulting systemic abnormality and a source of pro-atherogenic molecules that amplify the arterial damage. It starts from the liver itself because when you have fatty liver or inflammatory cytokine and insulin resistance, as we know as a two-hit hypothesis, is starting from here. And there are some expanded of inflammation of visceral fat mass from muscle or from other source in the patient's body. Subsequently, these cause increased triglyceride, rich VLDL, and this is associated with atherogenic lipid profile. So it causes chronic inflammation, hypercoagulation, and dysglycemic usually happen in this group of patients. That's why this causes atherothrombosis in patients with Nafld or NASH. So the key point, after we know that the association is quite strong, as a clinicians, what can we do for the patients? So our group performed a study a few years ago, tried to calculate Framingham risk score, which is one of the accept tool to evaluate the cardiovascular risk in general population. And we found that with this the long-term study, this study followed up the patients in average about 11 years. We found that patients with Nafld have a higher Framingham risk score than general population, and those quite significant actually in men than women. As you can see, this is the estimated 10-year risk of coronary heart disease in fatty liver patients compared to general populations. Other studies do the same thing and use different tools. For example, CAC or coronary arterial calcium score, which is have done in several studies. I pick up one in this group of patients, HIV-infected patients with Nafld. As you can see, the result of those who have CAC more than 100, which is the cutoff for clinical significance, is far about 8%. And it's increased the relative risk of heart disease about 10 times. And in sub-analysis, it's showing that the higher CAC score is linked or associated with the higher risk of coronary heart disease by Framingham risk score. What else? The simple blood tests such as GGT, gamma-glutamyl transpeptidase, there's zero information about this because it's a simple test, but it's non-specific test. But it shows that in non-alcohol drinker, higher GGT, especially one unit that higher on log scale, have increasing the adjusted hazard ratio about 1.2 to 1.3. So this is the meta-analysis that confirms that this blood test may be useful in some population. Again, there are some weakness of this study that this association is not confirmed in subgroups such as in elderly patients. And in addition, ALTs in this study was also analyzed, but there is shown no association with cardiovascular risk. So GGT is quite interesting to use, but should be careful when you want to apply in your practice. So in general, there is no guideline or no recommendation, but this study just published last year, and I think it's quite interesting for practice. They propose the telediagnosis and treatment of CVD list by using Framingham risk score in patients with Nafld. And as you can see, they start with patient with Nafld and ask the first question that it's quite simple. Do you have diabetes or not? If you have diabetes, as we know, diabetes is the risk factor to increase liver fibrosis, then you go to lifestyle modification plus treatment of cardiovascular risk, because when you calculate the risk, it's found that it's usually high, such as dyslipidemia, diabetes, or everything. But if you have no diabetes, they recommend to calculate Framingham risk score to stratify into three groups: low risk, which is less than 10% for coronary heart disease; moderate risk 10 to 15, and high risk more than 15%. In this group, moderate risk, they suggest to do more tests which more accurate, such as carotid ultrasound, to identify more evidence of coronary heart disease risk. For high risk, go to treatment. For low risk, just lifestyle modification. So you can practice and can use this as some information for your patients. So for the first part, I think that the information support that fatty liver surely associated with increased CVD risk. But it's not the time to add fatty liver itself as a risk factor to cardiovascular risk calculator. So currently, there are standard calculators for cardiovascular risk, such as Framingham risk score, ASCVD is still a recommendation without fatty liver to add it. Increased gamma GT is quite interesting, but you have to look for other cause of higher gamma GT, such as alcohol or drug. And statin from the literature in this review said that you can use it if indicated, especially for those with ALT less than or 3 times of upper normal limit. For the second part, we move to the colon. As we all know that the patient fatty liver have increased the prevalence of chronic adenoma. This is a nice meta-analysis. Include 7 studies which enroll more than 10,000 participants. 5 of them have some enough or adequate information to analyze. The conclusion is that fatty liver associated with increased risk of chronic adenoma with odds ratio about 1.6. And Nafld did not affect the size, location, and histological type of colorectal adenoma. This is the 5 studies that I just mentioned. As you can see, the results have nice results and go along just only one study that different from the others. But the predictor for presence of increasing chronic adenoma is higher age, higher BMI, waist circumference, lipid disorder, hyperglycemia, and high blood pressure. This is a factor that usually present in all of patients with metabolic syndrome or fatty liver. How to explain the mechanism of this association? I review from several articles, and there's no conclusive what is the mechanism, but there are some 3 hypotheses that mentioned. First is there is an increased insulin and pro-inflammatory cytokine which can promote chronic mucosal growth. This is confirmed in rat model. The second one is role of intestinal microbiome, which is present and a lot of information that Professor Punchai just talked yesterday. So this is present in both Nafld and colorectal cancer. And the last one is patients with Nafld have low adiponectin level, which associated with increased risk of chronic adenoma. So that's how to explain the association. So after we know that there's some association about chronic adenoma and fatty liver, so as a clinician, what can we do? Again, because of we talk about beyond the liver, right? I have to review about the guideline, especially Asian Pacific guideline on colorectal cancer screening, which is a nice study for multi-center study by Professor from Hong Kong, and there's one side of our country too. So we call Asia Pacific colorectal cancer screening, which have score from 0 to 7 or APCS. This is composed of 4 risk factors as age, sex, family history of CRC, and smoking. For example, if my age is 50, I'm a male, and I have a past history of smoking, I have a APCS score of 4 with the cutoff of high risk group, and you should recommend patients to do CRC. For those with score of 0 to 1, we classify as a low risk, and 2 to 3 is as a moderate risk. So this is the guideline that recommend for certified patients to send for CRC screening. This group of investigators subsequently do another study to see the role of combine of this scoring system plus FIT test or fecal immunochemical test for early detection of advanced neoplasm. This is in general population, not in fatty liver patients. As you can see from this slide, this is a diagram to show you that after they do the study, they found that those with APCS scores quite high or high risk, from the score from 4 to 7, they found neoplasm adenoma is about 10% compared to those with low risk, just only 1.5%. It's about 7 times. And by this study, to summarize, they found that if you use with the FIT test, those with high risk, is no need to use FIT test. You can send them to do early CRC. But for those with low risk or moderate risk, you do the FIT test. It's the simple test. If FIT positive, you do early CRC. But if FIT test negative, just follow up and do the standard CRC, such as for age above 50 or something like that. So by this scheme, as you can see from the APCS score, some component is overlap with comorbidity in fatty liver patients. So by all of this information, I think fatty liver itself cannot add that to the scheme or criteria for screening patients to do CRC. But I still recommend that you can keep in your mind that fatty liver have a higher incidence of chronic adenoma, but you should follow up with this scheme of recommendation for CRC. For the last part, it's very simple and short. Because of obstructive sleep apnea, this is increasing preference in patients with fatty livers. About 50% to 60% is up to degree of liver inflammation. And in vice versa, fatty liver is also more preference in those patients with present with obstructive sleep apnea. Another study from Taiwan, this is used the Taiwan database from insurance claims, included more than 17,000 during 2000 to 2008. They found that OSA was significantly associated with increased risk of liver disease, including fatty liver, with hazard ratio of 5. So keep in mind that this is come together. And from this study, as a meta-analysis, showed that obstructive sleep apnea that was diagnosed or measured by polysomnography, showing that the odd ratio of OSA for the presence of Nafld diagnosed by histology is about 2 times. So if you remember, as we talk about coronary vascular disease, that increasing about 2 times, sleep apnea is the same. And sleep apnea itself is also associated with cardiovascular disease. All of this information confirm the interaction between multi-system. So to control, to manage patient with Nafld is not just only to look at the liver. Please consider other organs too. Finally, I just to remind you as a clinician, when you send patients to do polysomnography, just to know a little bit about the result interpretation, such as polysomnography, they use the term of AHI. It's the apnea and hypopnea per hour, or AHI index. If above 5 is abnormality. If above 30, this is severe degree of apnea. So just keep in mind, try to taking detail of history of patients, and then send to test of this one if indicated. And again, why this happened, or why, or how to explain the association of OSA and fatty liver. The major trigger of this association is intermittent hypoxia, which can cause triglyceride accumulation, increased oxidative stress, and upregulation of lipid biosynthesis in liver, and subsequently cause liver injury. So that's the thing that I can summarize for this session. I confirm to you all that NASH and associated comorbidity is an emerging trend in hepatology fields, and you need to look for in your practice. Second, the increased risk of chronic adenoma, cardiovascular risk, and OSA is about 1.5 to 2. And finally, for the most important one as the cause of death, I recommend that you should use the standard atherosclerosis risk calculator, for example, Framingham risk score, which is not inexpensive, but just use your application such as QX Calculate. You can download it free of charge, and you can calculate them and use in your practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sombat. It's my pleasure now to invite Professor Fabrizio Bonino to give us the European perspective of extrahepatic manifestations of fatty liver disease. Professor Bonino is currently the Director of General Medicine, as well as liver and digestive diseases at the University Hospital of Pisa. He spent research fellowships in the universities of Turin, National Institutes of Health, as well as Georgetown University, and has published over 300 papers. So he's very well versed to provide us an update or the European perspective on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adams. Thank you, Professor Setazin. Just according to the previous presentation of Professor Tripasertsuk, I will go on dwelling on few issues we debated in a special interest group of the Italian Association for the Study of the Liver, out of which we made a recent publication on the Digestive and Liver Disease Journal. And just I want to point out what is well known worldwide, either in US, Asian Pacific area, and European population, that we have an increased epidemic of fatty liver not only in overweight and obese people, but also in normal population over the age of 50 or 60. And most importantly, as we have seen from the beautiful lecture of Professor Tripasertsuk, the majority of the problem derived by the fact of having a fatty liver in terms of life expectancy and morbidity and mortality comes, and there are many evidences pointed out already in the previous lectures, that the major problem for dying comes from non-liver disease. Cardiovascular, metabolic, and neoplastic diseases are a major problem when there is the red light in the screening of health when you find a fatty liver. Then you have an increased problem when there is NASH, when inflammation, hepatitis is added, and then you have also the risk of morbidity and mortality due to liver diseases. And this is another evidence showing the prevalence of coronary artery and abdominal aortic calcification in subjects with and without Nafld, showing the real important impact of Nafld in that special pathogenic evidence. But also we have seen in the last decade a consistent change in epidemiology of hepatocellular carcinoma. that is not fading anymore in Europe and particularly in our country. We have seen in the second last decades a decline, but now we are stating because there is an increase of Nafld chronic disease and NASH, an increase of etiology of hepatocellular carcinoma associated with this underlying chronic liver disease. So there is a changing spectrum in hepatocellular carcinoma. As already pointed out, many factors influence the accumulation of fat in the liver. I will not repeat what has already been shown. It is clearly hypothesized that a second hit of inflammation is needed to have a trigger of NASH, what is the liver-based pathology of fatty liver. Or, better, in my opinion, a multi-parallel hit hypothesis is associated with the development of chronic fatty liver disease. And probably we have to change also the opinion, because what means non-alcoholic is a very poor definition, because it means that we have no evidence of drinking alcohol, but maybe the microbiota is producing enough alcohol to make steatosis. So we have to be sure that it's not alcohol. We should have the evidence that there is no metabolite of alcohol in the urine repeatedly in this, because maybe the alcohol is not drunk, but is produced by the bacteria. So also the definition of non-alcoholic is just a non-evidence-based definition. Another issue to make a step ahead, because it's already 15 years that at every meeting we are saying the same thing and no progress is made, and we cannot make a very scientific trial with any drug, because we have to skip out of the simplicistic, reductionistic definition or garbage can definition. Metabolic system, what means? A lot of things. As viral hepatitis expert, 30 years ago, we used to give steroids to chronic hepatitis with very poor results, pretending to cure a disease that had many etiologies. I would say the word of chronic hepatitis is nothing against the word of fatty liver, because it's much more complicated. So to pretend to have a cure for fatty liver is a crazy opinion. And also to think about fatty liver, it means another universe of a lot of things, and also Mediterranean diet. If we run a study in Italy in the areas or regions where they follow better Mediterranean diet, that correlates perfectly with obesity. So we cannot make such a generalized studies. This is the reason why we made this group studying a concept that is clearly in biology. In biology, nobody would address any biological event in the cell without an approach of system biology. That means you have a teamwork of people expert in different organelles of the cell trying to use mathematical model, networking, bioinformatics to try to explain the function of all the system within the cell. When we talk about the body, we have to do the same, system physiopathology, because also there we have to consider all the different systems and organs working. And that is the concept. We have to harmonize in a kind of orchestra what is happening in the individual between the different systems. And actually this concept was at the basis of the research program of the European Community, Horizon 2020, and this was actually what the workshop made at the basis of that project was stating, that system medicine has to copy the approach of system biology, because the object is to integrate the variety of biological medical data at all relevant levels in a kind of modeling, computational, mathematical algorithm system to enable the understanding of the complex mechanism happening at the level of the single patient. In Italy, we had this single topic conference on personalized hepatology in Pisa in 2013. Then a group of individuals, experts in the field, decided to address in a special interest group the problem of Nafld, of a view of Nafld in a system medicine approach. And the paper has been recently published on the Digestive and Liver Disease Journal, what actually we concluded? We concluded that we have to stratify patients in clinical practice, and particularly in clinical research. To stratify the patients, we need to take evidence-based characterizations from different physiological systems. For instance, also defining more precisely the criteria we use and the differences. Differences exist, but taking, for instance, 3 major definitions of the metabolic syndrome and considering and stratifying the characteristic of this definition in each patient. Second point, we have to consider that age is impacting, and evidence-based data show that it's impacting different in male and female. According to different age, we have to stratify the risk factor and the different impact on outcomes according to age. And also according to how the body weight and fat distribution is impacting at different levels in males and females. So we should stratify patients according to this variable at least. And in addition, another stratification has to be made on genetic factors. Ethnicity is impacting differently. Familiarity is very important. Absence, or if present in parent only or in both parents, making a difference. Some genes, particularly 2 major studies on genetics on polymorphism at single gene level were very important, and I think at least for patatin-like phospholipase domain containing 3 and transmembrane 6 superfamily member 2 have reached the evidence that we have to stratify patients for these conditions. As I said before, that means heterozygous, homozygous for patatin-like gene expression and absence or presence of the variant for transmembrane 6 superfamily member 2. This is relevant because we need to understand which kind of different matricial component we'll have in different subtype of patients when we are studying a drug or even attempting to do some cure in a pragmatic curative therapy or diet or probiotic program we are proposing to a single patient. Another point, it was already evidenced by the previous speaker, is that the cardiovascular risk should also be stratified by the evidence-based data that cardiologists have reached, putting together this value in the stratification of the patients. And also grading the impact of inflammatory condition, particularly inflammatory condition of the liver as a pathologist, but also general marker of inflammation, like, for instance, the protein C level and LPS level in the serum may be very important. So putting together these simple facts that are coming from different specialists in internal medicine, cardiologists, diabetologists, and gastroenterologists, we can have at least a possibility, because we have already depicted a series of factors which should be analyzed to stratify patients and prototyping them. This needs to be done for studies. But what we can do if we do not have a quantitative measure of fat? This is another necessary tool we have to have. Is liver biopsy a standard for liver steatosis? Cannot be. It was not for fibrosis. It will not be for steatosis, because the sampling error for steatosis will be very risky. And then it's not available for monitoring, frequent monitoring, which will be needed and is invasive. So no way. Probably we have to move out of this idea and take a standard. The gold standard is the magnetic resonance proton spectroscopy and Dixon analysis can be done in a very systematic way. You have to convince the radiologist not to perform magnetic resonance diagnosis, but just to make a spectroscopy, which is actually a technician work with an appropriate software. with a 5 minutes time of a magnetic resonance machine, in the hand of a technician with a cost of 100 euro, you can do this. So it's not true that it's expensive, just to change the type of approach, the new paradigm. Nevertheless, we can have an important step ahead, making normal ultrasound use a way to help the physician to have an index, a stereometric index, and using appropriate model, we can already have it. We know that elastometry is an important measure. Unfortunately, it's not well understood by the majority of those who use it because it does not measure fibrosis at all. It measures 3 physical vectors: congestion, inflammation, fibrosis. If you do not know whether the liver is inflamed or not, when you measure the FibroScan value, you are completely influenced also by inflammation, that is the infiltration of cells. So considering this marker of fibrosis only is very poor science. Provided that with this we have also, in the most recent FibroScan machine, there is a CAP index, that is a software designed to measure the attenuation rate, that is one of the many echographic features which over the last 20 years have been precisely defined by specialists in imaging as features related and associated with liver fat content. Hepatic renal ratio, attenuation rate, that is the only one analyzed by the CAP software of the FibroScan machine. Hepatic portal vein ratio, diaphragm visualization, portal vein wall visualization. These are all important factors. Then we can measure different parameters in terms of level of gray, differences in the gray level, in the texture energies, and in the wavelet analysis. So we had recently a project financed by the Italian Ministry of Health, and with a group of engineers of the Central Research Council in Pisa, we developed a software that is using different parameters, all the parameters, not only the attenuation rate. And what is the logic is to select all these features and identify a steatosis score that functions like a liver steatometer. And actually, what we briefly, I summarize some of the facts that are in the software analysis. The attenuation rate is automatically analyzed, and multiple lines and interpolation at several points are made, similar to the CAP. In addition to that, also hepatic renal ratio is measured, identifying automatically 2 specific ROI. Hepatic portal vein ratio is also identified in a similar manner. Diaphragm visualization is also analyzed with 5 different profiles. Portal vein wall visualization is identified with 2 standardized ROIs as well. Textures, very important, is analyzed by the software. All these data have been compared with the histology in terms of a number of cells containing fat. And we are using now, this is a study in progress, hepatosteatosis related to hepatitis C genotype 3 under therapy, because we know that clearance of virus response is associated with the quickest disappearance of steatosis. And this is a nice model to verify how the software can pick up this clearance, and the analysis of this provides a model. So the concept is, in terms of practical use, stratification of the patients according to the simple approach we have proposed of what we know in the different system and use over the years and pull them together to stratify patients is one mandatory fact. The other possibility that is available is to use multiple monitoring, quantification of the liver fat that is now available. Magnetic resonance spectroscopy and actually steatometers, which are now coming available, applicable to any ultrasound machine, because the other important point of the software I was talking about is that can be applicable to any ultrasound machine, so can make be easy and not expensive the measurement of fatty liver. This will be applied to the normal patients handling in practice, or also, most importantly for research, to answer the question whether a drug that is proposed for Nafld or NASH is really effective in subgroup, cannot be effective for any group, of course, because the reasons and the etiology may be completely different. So I think we are in an era where a new dashboard can be available with quantitative markers, also for monitoring the single patient and providing better results for clinical research. So in a kind of memory, we are back to the future. In Italy, in the Etruscan and Roman area, before Roman, Etruscan civilization used the liver to predict the fortune, the luck, or the destiny of a population. It used to kill an animal, look at the liver and trying to predict the future. I think nowadays it's much better. We can just look at our liver, not the animal liver, and without an invasive procedure, predict our future, because the liver is the mirror of health. And for us hepatologists, we are almost out of business because we have cured viral hepatitis. May have another business, but this time in a teamwork with cardiologists and diabetologists and nephrologists in the view of the system medicine teamwork. Thank you very much.
Thank you for excellent lecture. So we have time for the discussion. So the speakers come to the stage. Any question from the audience, please? The first question, and I can ask Dr. Professor Sombat. In the Nafld population that have the cardiovascular morbidity and mortality are in fact more important than hepatic adverse event. And Nafld was independently associated with increased severity in coronary artery disease that you said that. Which the special population of Nafld we have to focus on screening cardiovascular disease, or just follow by only Framingham score after assessment the coexisting risk factor?
Yes, there's two things that I have to mention. First is the aspect of fatty liver. There's the chairperson asked, there's some evidence showing that those with NASH or inflammation or advanced fibrosis is the risk group. And as you know that fibrosis, at least F3, is the strong factor for long-term outcome or mortality in study performed by Professor Angulo. And the second part, because of Framingham risk score is one of the example of cardiovascular risk calculator. If you look into detail, the Framingham risk score composed of several factors such as age, diabetes, blood pressure, blood level of lipid content. So I think this one is more coverage, or I can use the term of system medicine as Professor Bonino says. So I think in my practice, I usually calculate this atherosclerotic vascular disease list in the group of patient Nafld, and I think it's useful for you to make decision to send them to investigate in detail or not. But again, there is no any standard guidelines or recommendation for this one.
Professor Ramchai.
Would like to ask Dr. Bonino. Your lecture really is very stimulating and very interesting indeed. I would like to ask you just a very naive question. Do animals have NASH? and the animal which close to human, like chimpanzee, anything, do they have NASH? Just or only NASH happen in human?
I didn't get
Can you understand? Can you hear me? I'm sorry, the microphone. I think
the animal model.
yeah, do animal. I said your lecture is very interesting and stimulating, and then I just asked you the question that do animal have NASH? Is it NASH just only occur in human? How about the animal which is close to human, like gorilla, chimpanzee? Do they have NASH?
The point is actually, of course, I used to simplify things. What we have learned since I got most of experience of my life from studying viral hepatitis, there we understood that even when the etiology is very simple, one virus, then therapy has to be diversified according to the genetics of the virus, the genetics of the host, and changes according to age and cofactors. There we learn much more to identify the right animal model years after we understood the differences between etiology. Now in the garbage can of metabolic system, we will not go nowhere. In fact, it is 15 years that they are going nowhere, continuously talking but not having nothing, because we don't identify subgroups. Maybe there are 3,000 etiologies in the metabolic system. But we have at least to separate them. Somebody has different fat distribution, some other has OSAS, other have not OSAS, another has another important difference. At least stratifying for such difference should be done. On the other hand, we will not understand anything. So my opinion is that to decide which is the animal model happens to be very effective once you have already identified some specific subgroup. I was provocative also saying that the definition of non-alcoholic is a little bit questionable, because to be evidence-based, I would say, this guy is not drinking, but I don't believe it. He's not drinking, okay, I check in the urine if there are metabolites of the alcohol. If repeatedly there are no metabolites of alcohol, I would say, okay, he is not drinking or she, and also the gut is not producing alcohol. What do you think about that? I think we have to make this step ahead. Then eventually we can identify the specific animal model. But this is true also for obesity. We know from bariatric intervention that there are different responses, different behavior. How much of this is due to the change on the microbiota of the gut, driven by a very aggressive alteration of the gut? So we have to make more scientifically graded, step ahead ways to understand better even the implication of therapy. Nowadays we are really missing, we have a lot of proposed drugs, but we are missing studies. To do that, of course, at least stratification, but at least quantification of fatty liver. This is another point we are strongly working. The real, I would say, funny issue, every time somebody comes up and say, we have a very good spectroscopy in magnetic resonance, but it's expensive. It is not true. You have just to change the paradigm. It's a technical work, it's very cheap, cheaper than gastroscopy. It's like to saying, make a sandwich is very expensive. No, if you go to the McDonald's, it's very cheap.
Thank you.
It's the cost of the radiologist, which are expensive.
But you don't use the technique.
Excellent talk by both the speakers. I thought patient with Nafld, the kidneys also seem to be very important, especially in the setup of doing a liver transplant. In India, we've burnt our fingers, and I'm sure it must be the experience with others as well. We need biomarkers which can pick up very early renal diseases. We look at creatinine, urine output, and other markers which are not actually right. So patients of Nafld are more prone to have renal disorders after transplant when you give the immunosuppressive. So that is another system which is badly affected. And we recently published the endothelial dysfunction in patients with Nafld by measuring the expansile, ultrasound expansile of the carotids and the brachial artery.
Yeah, I think you've raised a very good point. There's a number of cross-sectional studies which have linked fatty liver disease with chronic kidney disease. I agree that new markers for chronic kidney disease are needed. I had a question for Professor Bonino regarding the use of the steatometer, which looks like it can quantify hepatic steatosis to a much greater extent than ultrasound. And do you think there's any clinical utility in quantifying hepatic fat in terms of risk to that patient of both liver-related and extra-hepatic manifestations or complications of disease?
Of course, we cannot answer that. The only thing we can say, we are quite happy on the preliminary results. And after, since it is a very simple, easy to mount software in any ultrasound, we are happy to share this with other people just to enlarge the experience and step ahead to have these multiple ways, and I am quite sure we'll try to respond to answer your questions. But we need that to do. What we can say is definitely this system is better than a simpler cap attenuation, right? Because have a multiple vision, and so it's more sophisticated. Of course, we have to be, I would say, a spectroscopy, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, should be performed in everyone, at least once in a while. With the system, I said, we can make it cheaper, more standardized, and the cost will be not a problem. The other issue is we can already, with the ultrasound diagnosis, understand two major categories, or let's say three categories. And this is seen at the ultrasound. Is steatosis homogeneous? Yes, no? Or is intermediate or completely dishomogeneous? According to these three, the measure we are using have to be very different and careful. When we talk about homogeneous, liver biopsy is perfect. It tells even how many cells are positive or not. That is something only biopsy can tell. But liver biopsy is not a good monitoring when you have a different distribution. And there you have also to ask and tell to the guy that does magnetic spectroscopy to have more defined points on the issue that if they run also Dixon analysis that already consider that difference is a problem that has to be known before. So the way of quantifying can be different, and also when we publish paper or design a study, we should introduce this stratification in the beginning. If we don't do that, we will still lack step ahead knowledge.
Okay, so thanks for excellent lectures. As we know that the people with Nafld has increased mortality, about 1.7 until almost 2 times higher than general population without fatty liver. And now I'm glad to hear that we talk about the problem beyond the liver. Because from that mortality, you can see that even they had higher mortality, but only 17% or 14% die from liver-related mortality. That's why today we talk about the problem beyond the liver. My question is, now we focus on, as a hepatologist, you always look at, partly not lifestyle modification, talk about pharmacotherapy. We look at early liver disease. So you think that all pharmacotherapy now, even under investigation, that we try to improve the liver disease, will we also able to reduce the problem beyond the liver?
If I can add a point, there is also a conceptual view that we have to change. We hepatologists are used for many years to treat asymptomatic patients before the disease becomes with signs and symptoms. Instead, cardiologists and diabetologists are starting to treat only when symptoms occur. So the real issue now is to tell to another one, to check what they don't. So my view is the liver fat, when we'll be able to measure quantitatively and improve what we were discussing, it will be an issue to start to treat cardiovascular disease before it's too late, diabetes before it is already irreversible. When hypertension is already there, you don't go back anymore. So this is the medicine of after the earthquake and the medicine trying to prevent the earthquake.
Yeah, that's my point. I think liver is one aspect of this complex disease.
Yeah.
So sometimes new therapy, you can see we try to target only at the liver. So that my point is, yet I understand that some new pharmacotherapy, they try to target at the beginning of the process, which we actually don't know yet which one is the beginning of the process. And we know that if you look at the Chinese study from Shanghai study, they follow up those with Nafld disease for about 6 years. You can see the new incidence of diabetes occur in about 25%, hypertension 69%, hyperlipidemia about almost over 50%. My question is, if we treat only fatty liver disease today, in those who still lack of another metabolic syndrome, will be able to prevent another non-hepatic problem? That's my question. If it's true, it will be good, because today you can see, if you look at the liver disease, most of the study just look on the severity of NASH, but not look at another problem beyond the liver. So we're still not sure that to treat fatty liver, shall be able to actually reduce all morbidity and mortality. And my second question is, I would like to ask Professor Sombat. You talk about malignancy, particularly colonic cancer. So, as we know, that is quite generally recommendation for colorectal cancer screening in general population. So, would this recommendation will be different in patients with fatty liver? For example, do we need to screen at younger age? And do we need to shorten interval of colonoscope in patients with Nafld?
That's why I try to explain the risk stratification by use APCS scoring system. I think that's one is coverage and good enough to use for indicator to screen patients for colorectal cancer screening. In addition, we just do one study in our center and to certify the patient with fatty liver by using FibroScan with CAP. And we try to analyze the severity of fatty liver, severity of fibrosis, and the outcome of colorectal cancer screening in this group. We found that there is no any association between severities or degree of fatty liver and the finding of prevalence of colorectal adenoma. And our number of sample size is above 250 to 300 right now. We still collect the data. So I think the fatty liver itself should not be used right now, as our evidence is not so strong to recommend. It shows association, but it's not so strong to add it as a risk factor in the calculator or screen for certify the patient. So I think it's not the time. So I recommend to use APCS score.
I think if I want to make agreement with you, I can say that what your study is, you just look at the association of colorectal cancer and severity of fatty liver disease, not with the general population. You just say that, okay, from your study, you don't see any the association between severity of NASH and incidence of colorectal cancer, but you haven't answered my question between people without fatty liver and fatty liver.
Yeah, in that group, we do the sample size of those participants who will come to do CRC and showing that the fat content by FibroScan is normal and there is no fibrosis as a sample of general population who have no fatty liver as a standard to compare with. So again, there is no any difference among the group. Okay. I will show this study I send this research to DDW. If the results are, if it's accepted, I think this study may be interesting to show you later.
Okay, and that's same as in Australia? You still recommend the same recommendation for colorectal cancer screening should be same between those with and without fatty liver?
Yeah, it hasn't been adopted into any routine screening guidelines as yet, and I think that the evidence is accumulating, but I don't think we're quite there yet to make firm recommendations.
Yeah.
And I think part of that's probably based upon
Yeah.
all the risk factor stratification that Professor Bonino mentioned.
That's really good because I want to see echo from the panel because if you look some article from USA now they try to recommend you to do colorectal cancer screening at the early age and shorter interval in people with fatty liver. With myself, I don't see any strong evidence to make that recommendation.
The last question is there any CAPS evaluation by the FibroScan or any surrogate markers that have a correlation with the burden of the cardiovascular disease, which can apply in the clinical practice?
For application in clinical practice, short answer is no. But there is more accumulation information. For example, genetic factor, there are some data of PNP-LA3. There is more preference in those fatty liver with cardiovascular events compared to those without. Some information like this, I think this is the new trend to check some serum biomarker or some genetic factor to correlate with the long-term outcome. But again, there's no strong or no enough information to do it. But just to look for this information and follow up, I think system medicine may be helpful and may give us the answer.
If I can, I agree. What it can be advised is we need to do, since I'm really strongly against this word that is believing that FibroScan is measuring fibrosis. This was just a marketing thing. But it's not, it's like saying, since doctors are used to measure time, we invented another physical measure, but call it a clock. But instead, we should try to define different cutoffs for the FibroScan, even in the fatty liver, doing liver biopsy and measuring transaminases concomitantly. Because if you use carefully the FibroScan, once you know that there is no inflammation related to other factors, viral diseases, when you have a kilopascal of 5 or 6, this is NASH. It's a marker of NASH. Because if you have not inflammation, you should have a normal below 4. But this is a practice that now has not yet reached the evidence-based definition. So we need to sub-study the relation between histology and fibrosis and inflammation in NASH and fatty liver, and maybe also, as is coming up in different settings, the cutoff has to be related to that. So I think I agree. Nowadays, we do not recommend, but it is very useful in research setting, because in the future can be a differentiation in addition to LT, because it shows whether there is an infiltrate or not.
Okay, the time is up. Thank you for all the speakers and Leon Adam for participation.